All right, thanks for coming, everyone. So I'm Janessaworrell. I'm a senior manager at Acquia. I've been at Acquia for about 5 years. I have 12 years of experience managing programs and projects, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And I've been working with Drupal for the last 9 years.
And my name is Brianna McCullough, and I'm a program manager at Acquia, and I've been there for 3 years, and then I have 10 years of experience as well in managing programs and projects in the public and private sector. All right, so for our agenda today, we're going to talk about what governance is and why you need it. Then we're going to jump into the objectives of governance and then move into different types of governance frameworks. Then we'll talk about applying the governance to your organization, and then we'll talk about the ownership of tasks and the different roles. There we go. All right, so first we're going to start out with talking about what is governance and why do you need it for your organization to prevent it from becoming the Game of Thrones. So what is this governance thing that we're talking about? So governance is just a decision-making framework that you can apply in your organization to help assign ownership of tasks, set different priorities for the business, and define some guidelines, standards, and processes. It's basically a compass that helps set the direction of your platform. So it will define who has the authority to make decisions, who is held accountable for those decisions, and who has that decision-making power. It's a smart framework that makes your lives easier. It allows you to set standards early on in the process, and it also helps to flatten and streamline the decision-making process. It puts the power of decision-making, authority, and accountability back on the business unit, so that's helpful in streamlining things. And then during Game of Thrones, so how this might tie back into Game of Thrones, is you see the evolution of different types of governance in the show, and so some of them work better than others, and some governance frameworks got thrown out the window at different points. I'll try not to spoil it.
All right, so if you only focus on the code that you're delivering throughout your process, you'll have missed out on key concepts that will help you ensure your site and your platform are successful. So a lot of times throughout this presentation, we'll talk about a platform, because generally if you've got multiple sites on a platform, that's when your governance can get really out of hand. However, this can also apply to an enterprise level site where you've got multiple different stakeholders or business units that may be weighing in. So they're interchangeable, but for the most part, we kind of look at it more from the platform perspective, again, because it can get pretty unwieldy. So by viewing all actions from what you get at your end goal and how they can benefit the entire organization, you'll ensure that you're thinking platform first and not just focusing on features that have little ROI. This is a big risk that we see with a lot of our customers, is that they focus on one small thing because they think it'll be huge, but then they invest a ton of money into this as opposed to thinking about your bigger picture from the beginning. All right, so effective governance. So if all the different houses from Game of Thrones had sat down in season 1 and talked about their end goals, priorities, family ties, the outcomes that they were looking for, then the seasons and the show probably would have ended quite differently and probably would have been about 1 season long. A lot less entertaining, but for your governance structure, definitely what you want to look for. There are 4 key items to set from at the outset that will help ensure you're successful. You can start small and add to these. So you don't need to go out on day 1 with an 80-page governance structure, but putting in some baselines up front will really help, and then you can build upon them as you start to add more business owners and more teams to your project. So the 4 key things are establishing roles and responsibilities, which will lead to clear lines of communication across your company. Reduce risk and improve consistency by establishing enterprise-wide standards for branding, data collection, storage, and content standards. So we'll get to these 4 different areas later in the presentation, but it's important that you look at all of these from the beginning. You want to deliver digital experiences that are more consistent and efficient by establishing your agile development process up front. So this will support both your enterprise-wide priorities, but also your brand-specific priorities. So if you've got that governance structure from day one, you can weigh those throughout the process. And lastly, effective governance establishes a content management platform that can scale to support enterprise-wide goals, including common feature sets and reusable components. I don't know why that's so slow, sorry about that. So that was the benefits of governance. What are the negatives of not having it? As you can see from this image, the cost could be high, and you could end up like Jon Snow here, stuck in a battle and no way out. So the costs of not having it are you can create a place where there's no standardization and no governance within an organization, which can create and where organizations, can create and build whatever they want, which results in a disjointed look and feel. It can increase your overhead costs in technology. As I said before in the previous example, if you let each of your components go out and customize everything, so maybe they want to add one field to just their specific content type, that every time you need to make an update, you have to update each of them. Whereas maybe they could make a small change to their content and utilize the structure that you already have in place. Enterprise initiative and goals are often unclear, which makes it difficult to keep everyone focused. There's no clear definition of roles and responsibilities across the enterprise. So if it's not clear who has more say than someone else or how you get your feature introduced, then that's going to lead to conflict amongst your teams, and people will get frustrated and then potentially leave the content management system that you have, which again will increase costs. Everything becomes a priority, so nothing is a priority. And then lastly, users have inconsistent branding experiences and different messaging across sites and at different touch points. And we'll go into some more detail around those kind of standards in the next couple slides. So next we've got the objectives of governance.
So this talks a little bit about the different objectives of governance and what having good governance can help you achieve. So first, you definitely want to establish clear roles and responsibilities. So in a large enterprise organization, you want to make sure there are clear lines of communication, it's clear who owns which task. And that will eliminate any redundancies or duplication of work and things like that. And that helps ensure that ownership is clear. Just like in Game of Thrones, each character has a role to play. And then anytime when those roles were not played, people died. So, and then one of the other objectives is that governance will help define the platform purpose, MVP, and desired capabilities. So if you have a good governance structure with a clear group of people who are deciding what's important, what should the platform include, what should its purpose be, then that helps establish that enterprise-wide. And so you can make sure that all the components are going down that same path. You can get input on what the MVP features should be, what do different parts of the organization need to see in the platform. You can also help determine where flexibility is necessary and where it should be removed. There are a lot of jokes about government bureaucracy and things being too constrained, and so you want to make sure that your governance structure is set up in a way that does allow for some flexibility if needed. If you have a smaller organization and not as many components, of course you don't want a gigantic bureaucratic process. You want what fits for your organization. So having the right governance structure can allow for that. Next, it continually will allow you to connect with the execution of your strategy, vision, and goals. So different parts of the organization will not be siloed out. You'll be able to connect back to what your overall arching business goals are and the strategy of the larger organization. And then the next objective is that it allows for shared ownership and coordination. So you can be more efficient across the organization if you're sharing resources and sharing ownership of tasks, and that will help eliminate some redundancy there and making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel if you can reuse different resources and coordinate across departments. And then finally, it also will enable the efficient evaluation of priorities. So as Janessa said, without having good governance, sometimes everything seems like a priority, so nothing's a priority and you don't know what's actually important. If you have a good governance structure, you can always go back and figure out, okay, well, these are our priorities, these are our customers, this is what they want, this is what we should be focusing on. And then if you have a good governance structure in place, that can disperse the priorities out and make sure everyone is on the same page.
Okay, so there are three main governance structures that we typically talk through. So we'll go over those. I've got you a Game of Thrones reference slide and then a business slide in case you want to reuse them. So they say pretty much the same thing, but we wanted to make sure that you at least had a few business-related slides that you could utilize for future presentations if you need them. So the first one that we talk through is decentralized. So in a decentralized model, each team works separate from each other. This is similar to how in Game of Thrones, each house is separate. They don't share resources and they each have their own priorities and strategies for getting to their end goal. So in a decentralized governance model, you value independence over shared resources. Each brand works independently with separate teams, budgets, technologies, strategies, capabilities, and you don't really share anything, resources, tools, it's all separate. It excels in creating highly flexible sites with significant brand and market specific customizations. There it is, there's the business slide. So as you can see here, you have fast short-term gains, but you often end up being inconsistent over time. And you could also end up with your larger teams benefiting while your smaller teams fall down. Because if you think about it, in this model, if you don't have a lot of money in your budget, then you're not gonna get a lot out of it. So you've gotta build your own site by yourself, then smaller teams just really aren't gonna have much of a presence. Okay, so the next one is a centralized model. So in this one, you've got a centralized governance body that oversees everything and makes decisions, much like whoever sits on the Iron Throne, although hopefully with a little less blood and more collaboration. So in a centralized governance model, common tooling and experience are valued over brand independence, and it excels at reducing costs and time to market while emphasizing consistency of brand and message. But the lack of flexibility for the brand in niche markets may create generic and negatively perceived market experiences. So you definitely have to weigh that when you move into this type of model. And then here's your business side. So this is great for customers and teams who have high regulatory oversight. So for example, if you've got very specific brands or very specific security parameters that you don't want to deviate from, this can be a really good model to use because you set it at the top and you make people stick to that and allow them to customize as much as you can within your priorities. Okay, so the last one here is a hybrid model. So the hybrid approach allows for flexibility in resource sharing. You learn how your teams are related and how you can gain efficiency. At the end of Game of Thrones, they start to move toward this with the North moving on, but they didn't quite get there. So the hybrid model allows for sharing of resources and tools while providing flexibility when needed. It ensures that organization-wide goals and priorities are met, but you get that extra flexibility. So in this model, you would still have those standards that flow down, but then perhaps if you've got a specific business unit that needs to branch off in one case, you allow that weighing in the return on investment and how that fits into your overall strategy. Usually this takes a little bit longer up front because you've really got to set those standards from the top and have them flow down. But you will sacrifice a little bit of flexibility for some of your teams, but generally it gives you that good kind of middle ground if you don't have a need to go fully centralized or decentralized.
So next we're going to talk about how to apply your governance. So governance applies across the four different areas. So there's branding, content, platform, and code. So first, brand governance. So I think folks will know what brands kind of are. So branding governance ensures that you have consistency in managing the brand promise across the organization and get your messaging out there and it's consistent. It's critical because it drives awareness, engagement, retention, and loyalty with your customers. So you've created this great brand, but you need to put some governance around it. So for ownership, for brand, you would want to identify a brand owner who helps ensure consistency across channels. Super important if you have a big organization with lots of brands. So having like a platform will help set you up for success in that way. You want to develop an online branding strategy, so that will establish some guardrails but not mandates. Obviously you're going to have maybe some different brands, but you want them to be pretty consistent, but you want to allow for some flexibility. You want to establish some brand stewards who can help provide some advice and guidance on the branding and making sure that it's consistent across the board. And then once you've got that ownership established, then you can start to define the standards. And you can do that through different ways, through like documentation, maybe having a brand book for style guidance, and different assets to pull from, like images, videos, things like that. And you want to make sure you create and maintain those guidelines and make sure they're clear and accessible to all parties. Because a lot of people complain, you know, oh, I don't know where to find this, it's not up to date. So we always have those challenges with content management. So you want to make sure that everyone has access to all the brand guidance. But you also want to make sure that it's flexible, it takes into account different needs for different markets and objectives. And then once you have that defined, then you can start to look at different tools to help you with your brand governance. So you might have a content management system that establishes a brand look and feel, an asset management that ensures consistent use of digital assets across channels. You might have wireframes, comps, style guides, and things like that that can help drive your development and making sure you're staying consistent across the brand. The next type of governance is content governance. So content governance helps establish standards for how an organization communicates with its audience and then allows it to scale across different channels. Content and how you communicate varies by medium, and it needs to be adhered to. So if the creators of Game of Thrones had used the same content as George R.R. Martin did, there would be at least 20 seasons, but none of them would have the ending. So same thing again, you want to establish an owner for content governance and start by defining different roles and responsibilities, who creates things, who maintains things, and who approves things. So best practices might be to establish a content committee and establish workflows so that content would go through a marketing team for their approval, legal and compliance review, and then product teams. So basically all of your stakeholders. Then you want to move into establishing standards by defining style, voice, tone for the platform. And then you can create standards for the type of content and then establish a process for auditing and reviewing that content. And then from a tools perspective, you'll want to create a series of approval workflows and taxonomy. So that's something that we see a lot in Drupal, which is super helpful. A lot of times you'll see workflows, tools like workbench moderation and content moderation in core. So that helps establish those user roles and permissions and as content goes through the approval process.
Okay, so the next item that we wanted to talk through was platform governance. So for feature governance ownership, you start by looking at the big picture and making sure it's consistent across markets. And a good example of this was the global initiative to find the throne. So I don't know if you guys saw that marketing ploy that they did where they hid 6 of them and you had to go find them. But the messaging was consistent in every single region. So that's what we're looking at in terms of platform governance and your feature governance ownership. So a few key steps that are needed to get this in place is establishing a platform owner and identifying brand, IT, and marketing stakeholders. So you need someone who sits at kind of the top to think about what goes into the platform and what doesn't. You need to build a governance operating model with an executive committee and a change control board. Develop standards for intake and demand management, and determine the execution process for agile development and release management. So many teams leverage automated tools for managing sites and content across brands and markets, and there are a variety of multi-site automation kind of products, content sharing solutions available to help enforce this governance. And then the last one is your code governance. So you followed all the other governance steps and you're ready to release some code. You can't just throw it out there. You have to plan for it. On Game of Thrones, they had season release plans, from teasers to trailers to date announcements to gray carpet release parties. You have to plan as well to make sure to coordinate so nothing gets leaked. So in establishing ownership, this can be through widely distributed code management best practices, assigning specific platform components to teams and/or people. Standards are defined by developing processes for project and release management, and this is supported often by tools like Jira or GitHub, continuous integration tools like Travis CI. Specific technical tooling can vary based on your project needs and your developer expertise, but just you want to make sure that you set those for everyone so it remains consistent. All right, so you're bought in. How do you start making decisions? Hopefully it doesn't involve a decision tree like this that ends up with a lot of people not making it to the end. So what does this really look like? So again, here's our marketing slide, so you've got some to use. So in general, this is the areas we want to look at with governance. You want to utilize the framework you've decided on, the roles and priorities to determine what gets added and what doesn't. An important part of this is to make sure that you're leaving time for maintenance. So as you can see here, we've got intake, prioritization, and agile development. So that's kind of how that demand management that I was talking through, where you need to talk with all of your different teams to figure out what their next priority is and see where there might be overlap so you can figure out what you want to work on next. But you never want to forget about maintenance, right? Your site's out there, your platform's out there, you've got people visiting it, so you need to leave some level of capacity to do those core updates, or if you discovered a bug, and make sure that that happens. So typically we look at doing that through some sort of SLA, so there's a service level agreement within your organization for how quickly those things get released. And then on your innovation, you would run that through your standard kind of agile process, where you've got a full team that allows you to bring things into sprints or use Kanban, however you want to do it, and that's prioritized using your full governance structure.
Cool. And now I think we're moving into roles. So these are the different roles that might be played out in your governance framework and who does what. So we tried to apply some of these roles to different Game of Thrones characters. I'm not gonna lie, some of them might be a stretch, but I feel like I can do this. So your C-level executive sponsor for your project. So this might be someone who basically their job is to communicate the status of the project to the C-level. So they help with the strategic communication across the organization. They validate the strategy, the priority, the funding, and then they champion the project and program with the actual C-level executive. So I was kind of arguing that maybe this could be Grey Worm. It could maybe be Jon Snow in their different relationships with Dany when she was in her queen status. So they were both communicating up to her and trying to push their vision on her and communicating how things were going with their different spins on it. So Then there's the governance program manager. So this might be Tyrion in his role as hand to the queen. This person in this role would be gathering information from the different committees, like a steering council, organizing and convening those meetings, gathering the information and recommendations to report up to the executive and the executive sponsor, and then they plan those meetings with the executive sponsor and gather performance and operations metrics and keep a pulse on things and just report up. And then the next couple of roles are more like teams and councils and things like that. So we see a bunch of different councils across Game of Thrones, some more functional than others. So this could be the cross-functional team, the council that reports up to whoever's sitting on the Iron Throne. So this is a cross-functional team, almost like a cabinet in a way, because there are different people on the committee who have different things that are going on. So someone maybe is in charge of the army, someone's in charge of the money. But they help define the committee's scope and objectives and outcomes and timelines. They identify different risks and opportunities. They determine what needs to be funded and then request that funding. And they report the status and results up to the PMO. And then there's the Global Steering Council. So this council would identify initiatives and priorities, define and communicate digital strategy, identify different risks and opportunities, and help identify and staff and oversee the cross-functional committees. So I liken this a little bit toward the end when some of the lords and ladies come across from the different houses and come together and help drive the strategy from going forward. And then the last two roles are the executive council and then the regional leads. So similar to the other council, so the executive council helps define priorities. They make recommendations on strategy and for funding and different priorities. They review risk and opportunities and look at people, process, technology recommendations, and then determine the course of action going forward. And then the regional leads are, they coordinate and communicate information and tasks and training to markets. They maintain the marketing campaign calendar, things like that. They identify and gather requirements, new initiatives, and then they identify risk and issues within the markets and then report that up to the Global Steering Council. So this could also be seen as that group of the different houses when they come together and they're trying to push forward and decide on the direction going forward.
So once you have all those roles defined, you need to determine who the actual people are that will fill out the team and make sure that they understand their role, the structure, and that they have time allocated for this. This is actually one of the biggest misses that we see, is that you put together this great family tree of here's all these people that you need, but then you haven't actually assigned a person to do that task or given them an allocation for it. It's just like, oh, do this on top of the 40 hours that you already have assigned. So you need to make sure that that's clear for the team. So again, here's your business slide of what a team might actually look like. So we divided this into two teams to show what a platform team would look like, where typically we have a platform team and then a site setup team. So the idea here would be that you kind of have your 80-20 rule, where 80% of your features are built at the top and are added into the platform. And then the site setup team would do tasks such as your content migration, site building, adding in new content types if you needed them. But the idea in a platform structure is really that you want to keep as many features as possible at the top. But you're going to see that you've got a lot more people kind of in the sales team and the account executive team down there that are going to want to weigh in, because you need to have your site specific and your business owners weigh into what their sites need and make sure that your platform can meet their needs. There we go. So you want to make sure that you avoid a battle for the throne by determining a strong product owner who maintains a clear platform vision, and that will be your one key to success, is that product owner who's really going to make sure that you adhere to all of this, and that all this hard work that you've done putting in your governance structure stays in place. So your product owner is always going to be driven by business goals and needs. They're going to establish a platform strategy and vision. They're going to communicate that down to the business owners, and they're going to make sure that that's communicated to the development team through the prioritization of tickets throughout your process. So that is actually everything that we have. I think we're pretty much right on time. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. There are any?
So how important do you think it is for some of the C-level folks to have like agile I saw you mentioning like certifications and like so having agile or scrum certification. How important do you think it is to get some of the C-suite or some of the other folks in power to get certified or get buy-in to that process? I know like if you thrown, sometimes the nurse didn't always listen to everyone. So like is that a way? How do you push that?
Yeah, I don't know if I would go as far as saying that your C-level needs certifications, but they certainly need to understand the process, because you're going to have a whole lot of frustrated business owners if after you do all this work and you've set forth that your next feature is going to be this, and a C-level comes in at the last minute and wants to do something different. So I definitely think they need to be part of the process and be on one of those committees, and understand it, but I don't think they necessarily need a certification. I think more of your doers, it's important for them to have this certification. So again, you're all working from the same page and speaking the same language. A lot of times within the governance structure, we see that merely using different words can really throw people off in terms of what they expect.
Doesn't agile mean you can just change direction suddenly? Any other questions?
What's the percentage of failure if you don't follow your governance plan?
Oh, I'd say pretty high.
Yeah.
I think we've seen pretty much all of our customers fall over at some point. If they don't have one, it's just a question of how big. And I think that depends on how far you go. We've got one government customer who we spent probably at least 3 sprints worth doing some work on it that we then found out was only specific to that one site, and they were supposed to be the beta for the whole platform. So we were able to kind of adjust and make it more communal, but there was definitely some sunk work there that we had done.
Yeah, I'm curious you don't have Arya Stark up there as one of the figures. Why is that?
So here's my confession. I've only seen 2 episodes of Game of Thrones. So I relied on Brianna here, who's seen them all, to tell me about the characters.
I know. I think she's awesome, and she would have just been her own centralized structure, taking care of business by herself. Already don't need governance.
All right, well, if anyone else has any questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, we're open to them. But thank you all for attending.